Life is short and we will never be able to read all the books that we want to read. So our reading life is finite. And I've been thinking about all the books that I've been reading over the past 10 years and seeing how many I've read really makes me happy because my ultimate reading goal is to be well read in everything that has been published before the 1900s. I think I'm doing a pretty good job, and looking back at what I've read so far, I think that is also a very doable goal. The amount of books that I managed to read every year is kind of the same every year so far. And if I continue to read as I read now, which is of course a kind of a silly prediction because you never know what happens in life, and also I'm not taking into account retirement, but let's remain positive and say that I live up to 80, then I have about 4,000 books left to read. Now that is both unsettling and relieving, because 4,000 kind of seems like a lot, but also it doesn't. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't sound like a lot, but knowing what my goal is, it seems like I have plenty of time to read what I really want to focus on. Now, my mindset has always been to pick books that I'm really interested in and not that someone else says I should read. We have like so many lists out there of books that we have to read before we die, or books that other people recommend. But so far I've mostly picked books that I am really profoundly interested in. I also want to read a book well, so that means I will take my time to read through a book. I will take notes if I want to, usually I do, and I will try to write about what I read and really think and reflect. I also, and this is something that I really had to learn, I had to stop pushing myself through books that I wasn't enjoying, because somehow I always fell into the trap of thinking it'll get better, once I'm halfway it'll get better, and then before you know it you have finished half the book and you think, well, I've wasted this much time, I can better finish it. And I've learned not to do that anymore, because there are too many books that do deserve my attention, and I have come to understand and know my reading taste so well that I can fairly quickly say whether or not I will enjoy a book or not. So if I have hit 50 pages and I'm still not enjoying it, then I will usually not continue. Also, there has never been a moment in my reading life where I got halfway a book that I wasn't enjoying, and then the second half magically got better. That never happened to me. And I saw in my post, because I asked about this in a community post, some of you said that you continue to read a book because oftentimes the second part blew you away. Well, that never happened to me, which is also why this is something so very personal. Never let anyone tell you when to stop reading a book. When someone says, oh, I give it 10%, and before that 10% you cannot know, and you shouldn't give up on a book. That is nonsense. You alone know yourself best, and you know how to approach this. But in the past, I really had a hard time giving up on books I wasn't enjoying. I felt obligated to finish it. But I think the problem with constantly pushing through books that you're not enjoying, the danger is that you will start dreading your reading sessions. And to me, that doesn't seem like the smartest thing to do, because when you love your hobby, you want to do everything you can to keep it fun. But so that is something that I really learned over the years, is to just let it go and move on. Now, that is easier when you haven't paid for the book yourself. So when the book comes from the library, or you're reading an e-version, a free e-version on Gutenberg, for example, then it's different, and it somehow is less hard to give up on that book. But if you spend your hard-earned money on it, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And that is why I also really think about the books that I want to buy. Over time, I got to know my taste pretty well, and it almost never happens that I really hate a book that I bought myself. Whenever I can, I read an excerpt. I read the first chapter when I can, and I also use Gutenberg. The great advantage of reading classics is that you can find everything for free on the Gutenberg project. And so you can read the first chapters. Oh, I'm getting licks. I'm getting kisses. Thank you. And the great thing about reading the classics is they're all available online, and you can just try them out and see if you like them or not. Now, if you find yourself going from book to book, not finishing anything, I think that could potentially be an attention span problem, but that is of course something entirely different. But quitting a book opens up the space for a new one that you could potentially enjoy. Also, I find that it's easier to forgive a boring storyline, but not so easy to forgive bad writing, which is of course subjective. But when the writing really resonates with me and I love it, it makes it easier for me to forgive a boring storyline, and chances are higher that I will finish the book. But I really try not to push myself too often to finish a book I'm not enjoying. I do it from time to time if the book has really been influential, and if I feel like I really have to read it because of its importance. But again, you know yourself best, and if you decide after one chapter that a book isn't for you, then that is a valid reason. Now let's talk about rereading books. A lot of readers, a lot of you said in my community post, I don't reread books because there are too many books out there, which is a valid point. I totally agree, there are so many books. However, I would be heartbroken if I could never return to my favorite characters who have become my friends, if I could never return to my favorite stories. I love rereading so much. And yes, I am saying no to so many other books out there when I choose to reread a book. But that's okay, because I'm returning to something that I dearly love, and I know that I will be having a great time. It's also interesting how you experience the same story differently every time that you reread it. The book that I've reread the most is, of course, The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. And every time I reread it, I pick up something else. I see different things. So every time I return to a story, I am a little bit different as a person, or at least I hope I am, because I try to work on myself constantly, and I think most people want to do that. So when you return to a story, it's interesting to just pick up on different details. Now, returning to books that I didn't like reading the first time because it wasn't the right time to read them, I find more difficult. It's harder to pick up a book that you know you didn't like the first time. Or sometimes we pick a book and it's just not the right time, which I can see. But it also never happened that I picked up a book that I read before that I loved the second time. I hope that I will live that experience one day, because that seems to me so interesting. But yes, so far that never happened to me, and I hope it will someday. What I do believe is that some books are just too difficult for beginners. Like, for example, when you pick up a philosophy book and you start with one of the most difficult ones, of course you're not going to understand, of course you're not going to enjoy. And so returning to that later when you're ready is going to be a very smart, wise decision. But you know, when we're not talking about difficulty level, I think it's a rarer experience. So what about less is more? Some of you say that when you read a lot of books, you will not remember them and you haven't read them properly. And some of you say, no, I read as many books as I can. I don't mind not remembering every little detail, which of course isn't possible. I'm kind of in the middle, so I make sure that the books that I read get my full attention. I don't skim, I don't rush through books, because why would I rush if I'm enjoying a book, right? But I also think it's nonsense calling people out who read, like, let's say 300 books a year and say they haven't read it, or they haven't read the books properly. That is very individual. You don't know someone's schedule. And if you have no other hobbies, if you exchange all your free time for reading, you don't watch TV, you don't use your phone, then it is perfectly possible to read a disgustingly high amount of books. And of course, if it's your job, you also are going to consume a lot of books. So saying to someone, oh, you've read 100 books, I don't believe you, you haven't read them well, I don't believe in that. If you feel like you have to rush through a book, then the book may just not be for you, and maybe it's just better to read something else. Now, from time to time, I do get people in my comment section who try to insult me and say that I cannot actually read the books that I present. And to me, it's just so silly to know that there are actually people out there who would lie about the books they read. It's just so silly to me, and I don't see the point. And I do understand when I get reactions like that. I understand because I know that the internet is full of lies. Influencers lie all the time, and so I do understand. But those of you who follow me, you know I'm truthful. And I hope you know that I would never lie about finishing or not finishing a book, liking or not liking a book. There's nothing sillier in the world, and yes, I just would never do that. So about buying books. I never want to have too many unread books on my shelves because somehow it makes me nervous. They're all screaming at me. I feel like when I have books on my shelf for a very long time, I'm kind of afraid of losing interest in them because you never know, and then I will just have wasted my money. So I try not to wait too long to read the books that I have bought. And I do like to have some choice on the shelf, but then again, there are also ebooks, and there is Gutenberg, and there's the library. So if I feel that I don't have the book that I'm interested in at the moment, I can always go to the library. I guess the message that I want to give today is just to listen to yourself instead of people who dictate what you should read. Give up on a book if you're not enjoying it, or continue if you often experience that feeling of being blown away by a second part while not enjoying the first. Just keep in mind that your time is precious, and don't push yourself reading books that you're not enjoying. And there I will end this video. Thank you for spending time with us, and I hope to see you next week.